In today's lecture, we're going to be looking at Chapter 11 of the text concerning accountability and ethics in policing. The two major controls that we have on police behavior are internal controls and external controls. We're going to talk about internal controls first. The first is having a series of written directives, SOP, standard operating procedures, to allow the police officer to know what's expected of them, what they should do in a given situation, basically the best practices that have been taken from the experiences of police officers in the past. Now they're limited. Basically, a rule is written down when somebody screws up, and then they have to make a rule about it. So the only real issue, or there's two issues, is becoming over litigious, where you have too many regulations and it becomes hard to understand them and follow them, or the situation that you don't necessarily know that someone's going to screw up in a particular way before they do it. So it's hard to get proactive with creating these written directives. Also, the other major check on police behavior is internal investigations. Police departments that are of a size that require it will typically have their own internal investigative unit. Smaller departments will not. They'll be investigated by outside departments. For instance, in Georgia, most internal investigations are handled by the GBI. If something is wrong, the police officers in a department know that something's an issue. They will then call on the GBI to investigate that. So it's an external organization, but it's still within policing. Larger departments will do their own investigations for police officer misconduct. Additionally, various departments are instigating sort of early warning systems to try to catch the behavior before it becomes a problem, looking for warning signs, red flags in behavior, in conduct, even doing things like monitoring social media. There have been several instances in recent times, in the last few months, where police officers have gone on what appear to be drunken Twitter or Facebook rants and have revealed characteristics in themselves that are not beneficial for a police department. Most recently, a police chief in Arkansas he stepped down before he could be fired because he was calling for the beheading. He was calling for violence against Democratic members of the political system in his area and then at the national level, which is shocking and something that probably shows there needs to be more review of, if not just social media posts, the general temperament of a lot of police officers and police executives. Finally, cameras, very important. I'm talking into one right now. Police officers should have cameras on them, and they should be on all the time. If they are not actively using the facilities in a restroom, and even then, once you get away from the stall or the urinal there, you should have to have the cameras on. I don't want the officers, a corrupt officer to go to the sink and start breaking out lines of drugs on the sink. They should be on camera at all times. For the main reason is that it protects them. Departments that have seen implementation of mandatory body cameras have seen a reduction in the complaints against the police and also a reduction in substantiated complaints against the police. So the citizens say the police did one thing and that really wasn't the case. A lot of frivolous complaints are brought up against the police. The particular one happened in Texas a few years ago where a police officer was accused of sexually assaulting a suspect that he was arresting for a DUI. The complainant made all kinds of allegations that the police officer had inappropriately groped them and used inappropriate language and all manner of things. When the video camera, when the tape was reviewed, it showed the complainant, the DUI suspect, basically acting like a first-class jackass, and the police responding very cordially with as much professionalism as possible, and the charges were unsubstantiated and dropped. In fact, the individual was charged with making a false complaint against a police officer. So in more cases than not, the cameras actually protect the police officers as opposed to highlighting their negative behavior. External review is something that's been sort of popularized when the other mechanisms fail. Most notably, in New York City, the Knapp Commission report was done by, basically headed by the mayor's office, and had independent reviewers come in and go through the entirety of the police department. So the civilian review process looks like that. Typically, that comes into play when something has really gone sideways, when there's major problems in the department, and there's a need for external review, if nothing else, to sort of help the procedural justice of the citizens, um, to know that it's not the police that are investigating the police. It's people that they potentially trust or have legitimacy within the community. Where that's becoming more necessary, you have these civilian auditing programs that come in. Now, they're typically not looking at individual officer behavior, they're sort of just kind of monitoring the department as a whole. Sometimes that can be court ordered. Sometimes it can be a proactive stance from the other elements of that government, the executive branch of the government, the mayor's office, governor's office, something like that, where there's been potentially a problem in the past, and they're looking to prevent that from escalating and developing in the future. There are limits to the oversight, and mainly that goes along with the nature of police work that we talked about before, why corruption happens in general. There is a lot of time that police officers are not really monitored by any kind of direct manager, and in those situations, it makes it more likely that something's going to happen. And in the absence of things like cameras, it makes it more likely that those things can be covered up, which is a problem. It doesn't help the legitimacy of the police in that area, or really anywhere around the country, when these bad things happen, and there's no accountability. But it is just the nature of police work that there are going to be limits for the ability of external sources to review police actions. So it's very important for the police to maintain high levels of professional standards. They are a very visible aspect of the government. Oftentimes, that's the most common interaction that people have with agents of the government, other than going to the post office. The police are out in the community, very visible presence. They have the lights and the sirens and the uniforms to clearly identify themselves. So they have to conduct themselves with a professional manner. Because when they don't, then again, the last few years have shown that the citizens of this country, particularly the people that are the most downtrodden by negative police actions, negative governmental actions, have shown an unwillingness to accept those things when they happen, and have taken to nonviolent and violent, in some cases, protest to immediately try to address those issues. So some of the elements of this, of the professionalism sort of movement in policing, first have to address the autonomy, that police are going to have to be well trained, because they're going to be in positions where they have to make decisions. They have to make those discretionary decisions without the benefit of sort of hindsight or calling in a supervisor. In a lot of instances, decisions have to be made in the immediate, and they can often have long-lasting outcomes. Also, the information, the mindset, the skill set that police develop over the course of their careers is different to a lot of other jobs. There's a lot of things that they're asked to do that most other professions aren't going to have to deal with. Having to view crime scenes, or not even crime scenes, just potentially scenes of death, doing welfare checks on people. Dealing with crime scene cleanup, dealing with people making very antisocial decisions. Their professional skill set is different than almost any other profession, and that impacts the way that they will make decisions in the future. Education and training is very important, because it highlights what the department is emphasizing. We see in the previous chapters the chart and what things departments see is more or less important, based on the frequency with which departments train on those behaviors. So if a department is doing continued education in mental health crisis training or cultural diversity training, then it it impresses upon the members of that organization that those things are important, and that those things are this should be valued in the tool set of policing. There's also certification to maintain an even level of uh, performance, professionalism, to have standards across the entirety of typically of a state. Unless you're talking about a federal accreditation, then that's their own standards. But typically, states have their own level of accreditation to make sure that, at least on some level, all of the um, police agencies within that jurisdiction are maintaining a certain level of professionalism. Now, we've seen instances where that has been highlighted as not being the case in some smaller jurisdictions that are away from heavy media attention, in much the same way that it was in the past, the sort of backwoods, backwater police departments where you still have the sort of good old boy system still in place. Um, those are very problematic because they're basically a powder keg waiting to go off when you have someone's rights violated, constitutional rights, civil rights. When you have those issues come up, it makes all the police departments in that jurisdiction that are held to the same standards seem foolish. Also, it's very important to find individuals, to hire individuals that are committed to bettering this process, to not just going into policing because they want to beat people up or they want to, drive cars fast or be able to shoot guns. You want to have people that are in there that are trying to make the system better for the people that come before them, and also trying to make the system better for the people that the system is serving. Um, they also have a lot of ethical issues that come up with policing. Let me see if this is, yes, this is the last slide. And there's a couple different mindsets that officers will have, and some of them are more or less likely to arise a social or sorry, an ethical dilemma. Ethical formalism basically is the idea that we should be going by the book, at least with as much as possible. Enforce laws that seem to be broken. Now, enforcing that could be relying on a wide variety of discretionary decisions that are available to be made. Enforcing the law, enforcing, for instance, a prohibition of marijuana possession, could mean arresting the person, could mean giving them a ticket, could mean confiscating the contraband and giving them a warning. And all those things could be seen as enforcing the law. So you can still have a fairly wide variety of potential options and outcomes just based on the enforcing of the same law. Next is ethical utilitarianism, which is basically only looking at the outcomes. And this is not the best mentality for police officers to engage in, because oftentimes a potential illegal act could be sort of the means to the end. But the ends don't justify the means in policing. By violating someone's constitutional rights to protect the constitutional rights of someone else, it's not appropriate. It's not the way that they should be handled. And that's a situation where you're going to bring up a lot of ethical dilemmas in terms of, who is it okay to visit these illegal acts on, illegal search, or roughing up a suspect to get a confession. Who is it okay to do that on? Who is it not okay to do that on? It's kind of like a Batman fallacy. The police officers can't be Batman. They can't have looking out have the just ends justify the means. It's a logical fallacy, and it creates an uneven application of justice and unfair procedural justice. The next is ethical relativism, and this is less of a problem than utilitarianism, but it needs to be. It should only be applied by a sociological master, someone that is familiar with the environment, all levels of the environment, all aspects of the environment, all the neighborhoods in a city, to know when it is okay to selectively enforce some elements of the law, to know what things certain neighborhoods are worried about, and which neighborhoods are not necessarily worried about a particular type of offense. Typically, this is looking at lower level offending, public order issues, things that are not very detrimental to society as a whole, but some neighborhoods or some cities within a county might feel differently about things like loud music, smoking marijuana on somebody's porch, or drinking beer out of a bag. Some neighborhoods are going to be more or less accepting of those behaviors, and some areas go so far as to even codify these things. In Memphis, for example, you can have open containers on Beale Street, but that's it. You can't go beyond the 3 or 4 blocks that encompass that bar district. They sort of codified their the relativism and the enforcement of the laws. Um, so it's typically related to sort of the social norms of the community in which the officers are in. Now, any of these um, ethical mindsets are going to create situations where you're going to have ethical dilemmas. Really, any job is going to have that has sort of any kind of decision making process is going to create ethical dilemmas to some level. The issue with policing is that you're talking about people's livelihood, their ability to um, maintain their freedom, to maintain their American way of life, um, based on the outcomes of these decisions. It can be very impactful. So, where you implement these laws, what kind of discretionary decisions that you make, are going to weigh heavily on an individual's um, own experience in the field of policing, and also the type of justice, the type of service that they are meting out to the community. So again, take into consideration these accountability and ethical issues with the other sort of decision-making process stuff that we talked about in the previous lectures.